Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to George Croft's American Music Show. Today, we are diving into the life and career of Jim Reeves, so stick around. All right, we've got a new music alert, ladies and gentlemen. My latest single, High Sierra Coming Down, has just dropped and is available wherever you get your music. So go ahead and check it out, send it to a friend, and remember that's High Sierra Coming Down. We are also brought to you by Tyler & Co. Marketing, providing top-notch photography and videography services to Northern California. Tyler & Co. is your one-stop shop for social media content, product videos, commercials, promotional videos, and best of all, weddings and events. I dare you to take a quick scroll down their Instagram page at TylerandCo_marketing and tell me it doesn't look like a Hollywood production. If you want people to ask you who the executive producer of your wedding was, call Tyler & Co. If you want it to look like you got paid just to be in your wedding photos, call Tyler & Co. If you want the video of your first dance to look like it qualified you for the Screen Actors Guild, call Tyler & Co. And best of all, your future father-in-law is going to forgive you for everything. Everything. When he finds out how much money you're saving him on this wedding by using Tyler & Co. marketing to capture your big day. So visit tylerandcofilms.com for all your photography needs. That's tylerandcofilms.com. All right, so Jim Reeves is one of my favorite voices in American music history. He's just his clean baritone and his way of conveying emotion. Some of those songs that he crunk out are just hit you right in the feelings, and he was just such a vocal talent, and he was around in the early days here. So he was born in 1923. In Texas, I think in Galloway, and right off the bat, his life was pretty rough. So he was the youngest of 8 kids, and his dad died shortly after he was born. So Jim grew up, with his single mom trying to raise 8 kids on her own, and his older brothers, were immediately dropping out of school to go to work to try to support everybody, and this is during the Depression, so not an easy time for a single mom to be bringing 8 kids up, and but she does her best, and he seems to cope pretty well here, and so when he's 6 years, again, another like early talent, like he starts, I think he picks a guitar up when he's 6. I think it was like an oil worker or somebody that they knew just gave him a guitar and kind of taught him the basic chords. And he took to music, pretty early on. And he did what a lot of guys were doing back then, which is where, he's a kid at this stage. He's emulating the voices that he's hearing. So he's trying to sound, for the most part, he's trying to sound like Jimmy Rogers. He's even doing some yodeling. He's kind of singing in the higher end of his voice. And he's doing little performances here and there. I think he was on the radio when he was 9, just doing like a little performance. And kind of like some of the other people we've talked about, just kind of doing talent contests here and there and just, doing the musically talented kid thing. And he joins a band when he's 12, performing on the local radio station. And but anyway, he gets through high school, relatively uneventful. Oh, one thing that did happen early on, though, that would affect him for the rest of his life is Jim Reeves gets, I think it was the mumps. And, now that's not something we really deal with anymore because, the miracle of vaccines. But back then, if you got the mumps when you were a kid, it was a bad deal. And so he ended up, which I didn't realize was a possibility with the mumps, but it caused a testicular problem and made him sterile for the rest of his life. So Jim Reeves was never going to be able to have kids and he knew that from early on. And but anyway, so he survives that, but it does make him sterile. So then he, so gets through the rest of his childhood and gets through high school. And he was a talented baseball player. So he's playing in high school. He gets, he ends up going to college at the University of Texas at Austin. But he doesn't stick with that very long. He drops out to work in the shipyards during World War II. And he tried to join the military, but he got, I think it's called an F4 draft deferment, which is where basically he went in for his physical and they found out that he had like a heart murmur or something going on. There was some issue with his heart that made him ineligible for military service, which bothered him a lot. So, it depends on how you read the story. Other people have run into similar issues. Some people tell the story and make it sound like that was like another blow to his psyche and that he kind of saw himself as a failure sort of up to this point, which there might be some truth to that, just based on his attitude later. But anyway, he's ineligible for military service, but he is able to play baseball, and that was his passion there for a while. And he actually ends up getting signed to the Cardinals farm team. So he's like, he's getting scouted for professional baseball here. And I think it was 1944, during either practice or a game or something, he was a pitcher, and I guess was winding up for a pitch or something. However he did it, he gets this like sharp pain in his back, and it turned out that he had severed his sciatic nerve, which I cannot imagine how painful that must have been. Just like, I guess, just hiked his leg up real hard to throw a pitch and bam, severed his sciatic nerve, which ends his baseball career, unsurprisingly. So another kind of blow to his self-image here. But he'd stayed kind of involved musically, and he was still working with radio stations, and he was still kind of, cranking right along. So he decides, he's going to lean into music because he can't do baseball anymore. And he gets married in 1947 to a lady named Mary White. And Mary White, was she was a firebrand of a person. Like, she was very driven. She was a very smart woman. And Jim Reeves' story, as he carries on here, he reminds me of Marty Robbins in this way, where he's married to the same woman the whole time. And she really does, she's kind of his rock, and she ends up getting knee deep in the business. And then after his death, she carries his career on in a cool way, which we'll get to. But so they get married in 1947. And this is where, like I said, he starts working as a radio announcer and a disc jockey. He's in Henderson, Texas. And he would fill in spots here and there. And then 1949, we get our first kind of cool run-in with one of our other characters here, because Hank Williams, I think it was 1949. That was 1952. Because 1949 is when he made his first commercial recording. So while he was working at that radio station, he did, he caught some attention, and he ended up with this tiny little record label called Macy's in Houston. And didn't get any like crazy successes out of that deal, but he's on the board, so he's making music, he's recording stuff, and he moves to another radio station. I think it was called KWKH in Shreveport, Louisiana, and this is where 1952. So 1952 in the country music scene, Hank Williams is at the height of his career. But as we all know, he dies in 1953. He dies New Year's Eve, January 1st of 1953 is when he dies. So this is like just months before Hank is dead in the back of his car. So he's missing shows. He's drinking too much. He's on all the drugs. Like, Hank is in the middle of burning himself to the ground here. And one of those shows he missed was a radio appearance at this KWKH in Shreveport. And so and this is for I think it was for the Louisiana Hayride, which is, the Louisiana Hayride was kind of the direct competitor to the Grand Ole Opry. Like, this is where Elvis got his start, because the Opry didn't want to touch Elvis at the time. Like, he was too, shaking his hips and playing the devil's music or whatever. So the Opry wasn't having him on yet, but Elvis was playing the Louisiana Hayride. And so, like I said, Jim Reeves is here at, during that time, working in the background. And so Hank misses his performance, and at the last second, they're just like, all right, Jim, you're on, like, go fill in for him. And so he does, and he nails it. And he catches the attention of, I think Faber Robinson was the guy's name, who was in the audience. And he was the owner of Abbott Records. So just by sheer chance, Hank doesn't show up. Jim Reeves goes on, nails the show, and this record executive happens to be in the audience and decides, hey, that's our guy, picks him up, and they sign him to a contract, like, right there on the spot. And remember, though, that he's still not found his own voice. He's still kind of emulating, like, Jimmy Rogers, and he's kind of got, like, a little Jimmy Dickens thing going on. And so he releases this song on Abbott Records called Mexican Joe. And when he did that, he didn't think anything of it. Jim Reeves actually didn't really even like that song very much, because it's kind of a goofy song. It's not like a serious, heartfelt ballad or something. It's just a goofy song. So he records the song, and then, sometime later comes into the office, and his friend is like, hey, have you seen what Mexican Joe is doing on the charts right now? And he's like, whatever, man. Like, all right, leave me alone. And he's like, no, you got to go look. And sure enough, it's like blowing the doors off the Billboard charts, and he ends up at number 1 on the country charts. And, which was like a total shock to him. So suddenly now he's, he went from the guy that was like covering for Hank to now he's a new artist with a number 1 hit under his belt, pretty much accidentally. And then he follows that up with a song called Bimbo. And that was another one of these like goofy sort of sing-songs. Like, it wasn't what he was trying to be. And the problem now is that he's kind of that guy. Like, he's being marketed as the goofy song guy, which he didn't like. If he was going to sit down and plan his career out, he would have never picked that. He would have, picked a different song to go to number 1 with, especially when he gets 2 in a row. And so now while the success is great, he does feel kind of stuck, and he's, finding himself having to shake off this image that he didn't really want to stick with. And he actually, so he records an album just called Jim Reeves Sings. And it actually gets kind of shelved. Like the executives at Abbott Records weren't, like, they thought it was, Jim wanted to depart from that goofy guy image, so he would try to do more of these serious songs. The record label was like, that's not your thing, so no, we're gonna keep this off to the side for a second, which obviously irritated Jim Reeves. And that was in 1955. And then later in 1955, he signs a 10-year contract with RCA Victor. And that was really kind of the, a bigger breakout moment here, because this is where he runs into Chet Atkins, and because Chet Atkins was with RCA at the time. And him and Chet Atkins would develop a professional and collaborative, partnership that would benefit both of them greatly here. And Chet Atkins he was kind of a real champion for Jim Reeves. Like, he was kind of took him under his wing and was, working as a producer and, songwriter and things like that. He's really kind of diving in, helping him out. And, like, Chet Atkins is playing guitar on some of these early records for him. And, let's see here. And that's same thing. Okay, so he does a song in 1957 called 4 Walls. And this is where Reeves is really trying to break out of this image that he's not happy with. And 4 Walls was kind of his kind of his Alamo in a way, where he was like, this is a song I want to do. He performs it like, he wasn't trying to be twangy country guy about it. It was really more of what they would call a pop song at the time. And remember, Patsy Cline was dealing with the same kind of thing, or if everybody remembers, like country music at the time was kind of shuddering through its evolution into what we know now. But it went from like Hank Williams and, Little Jimmy Dickens and, Jimmy Rogers songs and things like that with like this very twangy sound to it, to these more polished, kind of jazzier songs like Patsy Cline was doing. And so Four Walls kind of falls into that category. And even the executives at RCA weren't super happy about it. But Chet Atkins gets in there in the mud and kind of sticks up for him and really helps him bring that song to the front. Chet Atkins is also the one who convinces Jim Reeves to start singing in the lower register of his voice, which now it's tough to imagine him singing any other way, because that's, the songs that come after this are the beautiful, deep, rich songs that we remember. And, but that's, because Chet Atkins was in his ear, like, hey man, like you can sing these lower notes. Like, let's lean into that. You don't have to just sound like everybody else. And so he does. And that's sort of, he starts to kind of come into his own and get his own brand. And he also starts doing stuff like, he gets, there was one, I can't remember exactly who was talking to him about it, but like when he's going to start being on TV more often, I think it was when he goes to the Opry in 1955, he joins the Grand Ole Opry, and there's this big moment where he's got to like decide what his on-screen image is going to be. And somebody convinced him to wear a toupee. Like he wore a toupee sometimes, but like there was this moment where he had to decide if he was going to do that on camera or not. And it was like, hey, if you don't wear it the first time, you can't ever wear it again, because then people know that that's a fake hairpiece, basically. So he decides to kind of put on the toupee, put on a suit jacket, and like kind of put on this sharper, clean image and sing, these more popular songs. He didn't like the pop like moniker. Like he would say, oh, I play popular music, or he would say, I play popular country music. And because he really saw himself as kind of falling in the middle there. And but then we get into, through the 50s here, he starts racking up some successes. And he starts touring a bunch, and he starts, collaborating with a bunch of people. He starts getting, hits are starting to come his way. So this is really where like financial freedom starts to kind of find him here in the mid 50s. And interestingly, I didn't realize this at all. Somehow in the 50s, he finds himself being a big name overseas. Like he's huge in like Holland and South Africa and India of all places. Like there's apparently like he's got this huge fan base in India. And he would kind of stick with that. Like he kept, throughout his career touring to all these, places abroad. 1959 is when he did He'll Have to Go. And that's my favorite Jim Reeves song, far and away. He'll Have to Go is like, I think, one of the best, written songs here. I talked about this before when I was doing my Song a Day series on TikTok, which you can go back and find. I talked about He'll Have to Go, which is like, it's a very sweet song, and it's like if you listen to it, it's just like it just hits you right in the feels. But then when you back out of it and you kind of look, you're like, how that would be so weird if that happened in real life. Because basically the theme behind He'll Have to Go is the girl is at the bar with another guy, and Jim Reeves' character calls the bar and is like, if basically, tell me if you want me or the other guy, and and I'll be there, kind of thing. And which is like, if you thought about that, like logistically, like he had to call the bar, get the bartender on the phone. The bartender had to confirm that girl was there on a date with another guy, then put Jim Reeves on the phone so that this, interaction can happen. And which like I said, it's a good song, but just like if you thought about that happening in real life, that's pretty weird. But just kind of a funny take on that whole thing. But that song gets to number one, and it stays. It got number one on the country charts and number two on the pop charts. And it goes platinum later, and it's a gigantic success. I think it was in the top of the charts for like 14 weeks or something. So it's a smashing success for him. And this is where he starts touring, and he goes to South Africa again. And or no, that was his first trip to South Africa was 1962, and it went so well. And like I said, he becomes this giant name in like Europe and South Africa and India and all this stuff. He later goes to I think it was 1964. I think 1964. Just a couple years later, he goes back to South Africa. But Jim Reeves appreciated that fan base so much that he actually records a song in Afrikaans. Like he learns enough of the language to crank a song out for him, which is, I mean, nuts. Because that's like, I think like 3% of the world or something speaks Afrikaans, but Jim Reeves appreciated their fanship enough that he performs a song in their language, which I thought was cool. And he's doing sold out concerts in Norway and like just all over the place here, which is kind of crazy to think about. Like I know now Europe has a big American folk music scene still. Like, you see all these guys going on tour to Germany and Britain and, all these places. Like it's still a big market, but I think Jim Reeves was kind of the first guy to really knock the doors down. And, like, I don't know what are the logistics for selling out a tour in India? Like, how would you I don't even know how you begin to know how to pull that off, but he does. And, so here we go again, height of his career. He's recording all the time. He's a gigantic name. And he, as a hobby, and later as a, part of his work, he started, like he got his pilot's license, which, as we know on this show, small aircraft and country stars do not go very well together. Because this, he ends up in 1964. He does some final recordings at RCA. This is where he records Make the World Go Away and Missing You and I Can't Stop Loving You. And, but those, I don't know if those had been released at this time. They had either just come out or they came out shortly after his death here. But July 31st, 1964, he crashes his single engine plane. So he was flying a single engine Beechcraft Debonair, and he was coming home from Arkansas, and he had, it was him and his manager / pianist and co-writer of He'll Have to Go, a guy named Dean Manuel. So the two of them are in his little single engine plane. They leave Arkansas. Things were looking pretty good, but then this giant storm blows in over Nashville, and he wasn't instrument rated, so like there's different tiers, I guess, of pilots, and to fly by instruments is like a whole another category, and Jim was not there. And there's radio traffic of him talking to the control tower, and the control tower is telling him like, hey, like he radios in to like make his approach, and the radio tower is like, hey, there's a giant like storm cell on our radar here, like careful and let us know when you can see the airport. And he kind of responds like, acknowledging, and then flies right into it. Just like hits like a wall of water. And he ends up like in the cloud of this storm, and he gets spatially disoriented, and he isn't, I guess I'm not super familiar with this, but from what I've heard is that when you're flying an aircraft blind like that, your eyes will separate from your instruments. So even though the instruments are telling you that, you know, your altitude and your speed and all this stuff, your inner ear will get confused because you don't have a horizon to watch. So your body's not tracking your movements with your instruments. And so if you rely on your body in those moments, you're going to crash. And that's exactly what happens to Jim Reeves here. He gets, like I said, he gets spatially disoriented and crashes his airplane, killing him and his manager. And just another devastating blow to country music. I mean, I think that was July. I think Patsy Cline had just died, because I want to say she died in April, I think. So it's the same year that Patsy Cline crashed her plane, I think. And but anyway, so just another one on the list of like Buddy Holly and Patsy Cline, and you know, just unmitigated tragedy out of nowhere, and pretty dang avoidable if he'd have just picked a different day or left a couple hours earlier, kind of thing. And this is actually, so then there's this tragic moment where the people that are out there looking for his body are Marty Robbins and Ernest Tubb. They like join the search party to go find him. And it takes them like 2 days. It's like 46 hours or something before they track down the wreckage and the bodies and stuff. And which, obviously, his wife was devastated, obviously, and so she's going through this moment where like she's calling the airport like, hey, have you heard from them? And they're like, yeah, we lost radio contact on approach, we're trying to figure it out. So 2 days later, they find the plane, find the bodies, and but she pretty immediately jumps right into like legacy protection, and she does not sit idly by for very much of this at all. Like she just jumps right into like dealing with his royalties and some of his, you know, unreleased stuff that was coming out, and she really takes on his, you know, the mantle of his career. And you got to remember, because they didn't have kids either. Like that was because he was, you know, sterile from getting the mumps when he was a kid. So her whole life revolved around Jim and his career, and their, you know, and they were a power couple that was doing the dang thing. And so the funeral is a gigantic event. They did like an open casket funeral where they like drove his body like through the streets. He ends up being buried back in Carthage, Texas, which was his hometown, I guess, or close enough to his hometown. And it's just. But like I said, he had just been recording all this stuff, so he has all these posthumous releases coming out right after he died, which has the same effect that it had to all these other people, where like anytime a working artist dies, their posthumous stuff comes out, their name was just in the news, people want to go hear that last recording that he made. And now that, like, what it does, that renewed interest, his wife jumps on top of, and she doesn't let that go out very quick, because they had a bunch of stuff in the hopper. And so she's out there kind of managing all that stuff. So then, you know, years start to stretch by here. Through the 70s, his wife is dealing with all that stuff. And then in 1980, RCA Records starts, with Jim's wife heavily involved here, they start releasing, like, it's not like, it's sort of the earliest version of an AI song, sort of, where like they took their recordings of Patsy Cline and the recordings of Jim Reeves, and that they used Dolly Parton in one of these, and they make duets, like using stuff they had already sang. And which was pretty common. Like Hank Williams Jr. did a similar thing where he does a duet with Hank Sr., like many years after Hank Sr. died. It's not like they just took old recordings and then the person that's still alive is like harmonizing with that. I don't exactly know how they pulled off the Patsy Cline one. That's pretty cool. But yeah, it's like that one they did. Have You Ever Been Lonely and I Fall to Pieces? It was the ones they released in 1980, which kind of gave another boost to the interest of, Jim Reeves. And these posthumous tracks, they're charting. Like, they're doing pretty well. And let's see here. 1984, Image of Me became his last song to chart. And that was another one where, like, he had recorded the vocal and then, his wife sort of managing the whole thing with the record company. They were really careful to produce it in a way that made it sound the way that Jim would have wanted it to sound. Jim Reeves, seemingly his only character flaw here is he was a perfectionist. Like, he was kind of a tough guy to work with when it came to recording and performing. Like, I've heard stories of him walking off stage and canceling shows because, like, the piano was out of tune or something, and he just didn't want to deal with it. And so he'll, like, walk off, if it's not up to his standard. He was known for, like, berating studio musicians if they missed, like, one note. He was not having it. He was a super perfectionist, later into his career here. And, but, like I said, that's, of all the things you could say against somebody, that's, he crunk out great music. He knew what he wanted, and he wasn't gonna, let anybody take him down any amount, quality-wise. And, so then in 1988, he's inducted into the Texas Country Music Hall of Fame. 1999, He'll Have to Go is inducted into the Grammy Hall of Fame. And yeah, and then we start racking up, like, more posthumous legacy here, where, they did a Jim Reeves exhibit in the Texas Country Music Hall of Fame. And then, I'm a Hit Again topped, like, a UK radio survey. So his music is still doing great overseas in Europe and, South Africa and all this stuff. Like, his music outlived him his career outlived him by a lot, because his wife did a great job managing, the assets that they had in the vault as far as his, recordings and performances go. And, yeah, so, and that really did, and that set his wife up, because when he died, it wasn't like, they had plenty of money coming in, but it wasn't like she was just set for life when he died. But his posthumous career does set her up, and she, I think at one point she was generating like $400,000 a year in royalties from his posthumous catalog. And so just a cool example of, kind of mitigating disaster after he died. And but yeah, Jim Reeves was, like I said, I think he had one of the best voices in country music history. It's just, there's not a missed step in that guy's delivery. And he kept a pretty good, it's so weird. Every time I run across these, it's like, oh man, the guys that kind of do it right, like they seem, like he had a good relationship with his wife. He kind of stayed, enough away from the drugs and alcohol that it didn't affect his career or music. And, kind of like Marty Robbins, where it's like same kind of story, and they still die young. And it's like, I don't know what is going on there. But then some of these guys that are just burning it down, doing drugs and running around on their wives and stuff, they live, into their 80s or 90s in some cases. But Jim Reeves is another one of the latter category, a guy that, kept himself pretty well put together, and is still has a career tragically cut short by what was later confirmed to be operator error on his plane. Yeah, so I don't know why country music artists mess with aircraft at all at this point. But after John Denver and Patsy Cline and Buddy Holly and Jim Reeves and Jim Croce and all these people that we've covered on the show, and it's like, why would the Red Clay Strays almost died in a plane crash like 3 weeks ago? It's like they're posting on Instagram about it. They're all like freaking out and shaking, and afterwards the pilot's like, well, it doesn't get worse than that unless you die. Which is like, why are we still doing this? Like, what? Like, get on a bus, you'll be fine. It'll take you a few extra hours to get there, but like, why are we doing private small planes? Like, that just seems like an unnecessary risk to me at this point. But anyway, that's Jim Reeves. He's another entry into that book of tragedy. But a legend nonetheless, and a guy, like I said, with a voice for the ages. So that's Jim Reeves for today. Thank you guys all for listening, and we will see you next week.